We're going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Deandrea Newsome. I'm really excited for this partnership that we have with the North Carolina Black Alliance. I am the North Carolina chapter manager with Local Progress, and we are a countrywide national organization that works with local elected officials across the country to pass progressive policy. In North Carolina, I work with all the North Carolina electeds that are members of our organization of Local Progress. And we do things like, you might have remembered the non-discrimination ordinances that passed throughout the state last year. We do that type of work, and it's very exciting. And I have some really amazing panelists here to join us. And talking about reimagining what's possible, taking a deep dive in the American Rescue Plan. I have my colleague, Legia Gong. Legia is our policy and legal director at Local Progress. We're really glad to have Legia. Legia takes a deep dive in what is going on across the country and helps provide great policy support to all of our members who are local elected officials across the country. I also have council member Barbara Fouché, who is a council member of Carborough Town Council. They're doing a lot of exciting work in Carborough. I'm really excited for you to hear from Barbara today. Barbara is going to be talking about the community input process that they were able to get done around the American Rescue Plan. I also have as a wonderful guest all the way from Prairie View, Texas, shout out Prairie View A&M, Mayor Brian Rowland, who is a powerful member in our network of Local Progress. He also serves as our co-chair for our Black Caucus for Local Progress. And he'll be sharing about, we'd like to see what's going on in other states, especially states that are similar to us, like Texas, what they were able to do, how they were able to get their community input process done, and how they were able to think outside the box for the American Rescue Plan. And so without further ado, I am going to let us get started in grounding us today on what exactly the American Rescue Plan. Believe it or not, some folks are still learning about this. And it's very important that we share, in especially spaces like this, why it's so important and why the time is now that we can be really investing in our communities in a way like we haven't ever before. And so I'm gonna pass it on to Legia. Thank you so much, Legia, for joining us again today. And if you could ground us on the American Rescue Plan and give us an overview.
Yeah, thanks so much, Deandrea. Just want to shout out the incredible work that Deandrea has been doing with Local Progress in North Carolina, just bringing everyone together and, she's actually a little bit of a policy expert herself. So I know she's an organizer and policy person. And so it's been great to really work with her. So I'm going to share my screen and just provide a little bit of an overview. I know this might be, some of you might be really familiar with this, but I think it'll just be helpful for all of us to get on the same page about ARP, and then we'll move into the panel discussion. So let me, I think, is this the right screen? Let me see. I feel like, all right, it should be this one. Can you guys see a slideshow, or are you seeing something different?
We see the slideshow.
Oh, great. I don't know why it's, let me just, great. Okay. All right. All right. So I'm just going to do a little bit of an overview. And just to start, the American Rescue Plan Act was passed in March 2021. So we just passed the first anniversary, and the whole bill itself, it was massive, $1.9 trillion. It's a lot of money. It was intended to be an economic stimulus bill. I think all of us, were well aware that the pandemic obviously had a huge public health impacts and, all the harms that it's done to our communities, but especially in communities of color and in Black communities, but also like the harm that it caused in our economy, right, with the lockdowns, et cetera. And that bill included a lot of things, expanded unemployment benefits, direct payments to individuals, stimulus checks, child tax credit, all sorts of things. What we're really going to focus on, however, is that $350 billion of that money was allocated to state and local governments, what was called the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. And, this is really a huge amount of money for state and local governments. And I think about a third of that goes directly to local governments and 2/3 of that goes to states. So some states have also allocated some of their state funding to local governments as well. And so that's counties and cities. And just so everybody is a little bit aware of the timeline and also why it's this conversation is so perfect and timely as part of this summit, is that this money is allocated in basically 2 tranches. So, the amount of money is calculated based on the number of residents in your jurisdiction, and you get half of it in 2021 and the other half in 2022. The funds have to be allocated by 2024, so decisions have to be made about how you're going to spend that money, and then the money actually needs to be out the door by 2026. But from what I understand, and I'm sure Brian and Barbara probably can speak to this too, is a lot of localities have been waiting a little bit because the final Treasury rule, which kind of says these are the guidelines for how you can spend this money, didn't come down until January of this year. So we're kind of in a period where a lot of local governments are trying to make big decisions about how to spend the money with all of the information that they have. So it's really like this, the moment really is now. I feel like Brian will say it even better than I do because he always is like, feels that sense of urgency as well. But the moment really is now to kind of get involved and to make sure that this money, is making a difference in your communities. So I think I mentioned this a little bit, but what's kind of unique about ARPA is that the federal government oftentimes, when it comes to local government funding, doesn't do kind of direct payments without a grant application. Typically, local governments have to apply. And for ARPA, it's not like that. You just kind of receive the money based on the number of residents, and it's just like lowers the administrative barrier. And as we all know, North Carolina might be an example of this. Sometimes, when the money gets funneled directly to states, it doesn't get to local governments because the state has its own idea for how to spend that money. So this is really kind of huge, especially for local governments. The other big thing that's unique about it, and that DeAndrea mentioned in the beginning, is that unlike a lot of other federal government money, this money can be actually spent quite flexibly to combat the pandemic and its effects. And I'll go through a little bit of those categories, but there's all sorts of uses that are allowable. I think sometimes that's hard actually for local governments because, sometimes it's easier. You're like, I could only spend it on these things. And actually it's more challenging. And I know Barbara and Brian are going to talk about that's why community input and kind of engagement is so important. So just to talk a little bit about North Carolina. So approximately $669 million of local ARP funds were distributed to North Carolina cities, and that data is based on cities with over 20,000 residents and does not include counties. And of that, approximately 188 million of that money has already been allocated or decided. But crucially, there's approximately $480 million of those funds that have yet to be decided. So that's still a lot of money out there that, we all can be a part of trying to figure out how to spend in the most effective and equitable ways. And so I will kind of breeze through the next few slides a little bit, but I think here are based on the statute, the American Rescue Plan statute, here are kind of the main 5 uses of ARP funds that are permitted. One is to fight the pandemic. The second is to address the economic impacts of the pandemic. That category is actually really broad, and we'll talk more about some examples, but that can include, rental assistance, direct cash payments. There's all sorts of things, supporting small businesses, lots and lots of things you can do to address the economic impacts of the pandemic, because not surprisingly, the pandemic has really impacted, the economies in our communities significantly. Revenue replacement, which is, keeping local government staff like on staff and retaining them. Premium pay for essential workers, and strengthening water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So I'm going to actually kind of move past these recommendation slides because I think we'll have chances to talk about some of these things. But I did want to maybe just shout out a few examples that, just from my work that we've kind of seen in various communities that, are exciting to us. One is, I'll just shout out that in Minneapolis, the city allocated $1 million to a community safety specialist apprenticeship program, which basically supports community and training community to address like community safety and community safety prevention. So, I think, I'm sure we all have concerns about, kind of the way in which policing is oftentimes, used for all sorts of things that maybe is not necessarily in their purview. And I think this is a great way of like really engaging community members in violence prevention. St. Louis has allocated money to rental mortgage utility relief and direct cash payments to residents. The city of Seattle used $28 million to acquire market rate buildings for conversion into affordable housing. So these are, hotels that they basically just bought and turned into affordable housing, which I thought was pretty cool. They also did some direct cash assistance to childcare workers. Just, in general, we all know that childcare has been a hard industry generally. And also, especially there's a lot of women of color in that industry. So I think noting that is pretty important. In Detroit, the city spent money to help support with home repairs for seniors, low income folks in the disabled community, $30 million on foreclosure and homelessness prevention. Spokane, Washington, and lots of cities have spent it on just new affordable housing construction. I think we all know that housing is a big challenge for almost everywhere in the country right now. So I think that's a great use of ARPA funds. And I'll also mention this just because I just thought it was really cool, is the Wilmington Delamere, where they allocated $200,000 to two organizations to combat food insecurity and food deserts. That money will be used to help bring a grocery store to a North Side neighborhood that doesn't really have a grocery, access to fresh food at the moment. So as you can see, these all are considered allowable uses under ARPA. As you can see, they're all very different, but they, broadly fall into the categories that that I kind of went through before. And then I just wanted to close before, we get to the panel on just like sharing one small thing, maybe not small, about ARP and inflation, because I know everyone's thinking about inflation right now, especially if you're an elected official. I'm sure people are talking about that. And I just want to, let you all know, because we work very closely with, economists and experts. And, I actually started my career working at the Federal Reserve, but I just wanted to emphasize that, the current state of inflation has really not been caused by government spending. And, even though some would have you believe that maybe that was the case, the inflation, it was caused by the pandemic, with the challenges with the supply chain, the fact that for so long, all of us just stayed home, and instead of going out to restaurants and spending on services, we were buying goods. And that obviously changes the supply chain. And unfortunately, it's also continuing because of some corporate practices to kind of keep profits elevated. And so that really is the cause of inflation. Obviously, there's some causes that have to do with, Ukraine as it relates to gas prices. And I just want to emphasize that what's currently going on with inflation is really not caused by government stimulus programs like ARPA, even though that was a lot of government spending. And, some evidence of that is just in the European Union, inflation is really at the same level, and they did not have the same kind of significant government stimulus that we did. So it just shows that this is kind of a global thing that's happening right now. And also household spending is really only slightly above the pre-pandemic trend. So it's not that, everybody has all this cash in their homes and they're spending more money than they used to because of the government stimulus. It's just not true. So I think I just want to emphasize this, because I know that you may hear from folks that, we shouldn't be spending money. We shouldn't be kind of using this money to be supporting the residents in our community because we're worried that's going to aggravate inflation. Well, that's really not the case. And that's not the cause of inflation. And it's important to kind of fight back on those narratives that are really about just, keeping government down and preventing government from really like helping people who need the help. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back to DeAndrea.
Thank you so much, Legia. That you actually kind of sparked some questions for Ian that I would love for you to expound on. I really love how you brought that together and how all of these issues are connected. And just, to shift back into ARPA being like a major government stimulus that was the result of the pandemic on how we're trying to bring our communities back to pre-pandemic. ARPA actually gives us the opportunity to go beyond that and gives our communities a better foundation. We don't want to go back to where we were. We want to surpass that and make our communities better for all those that live in their communities. And so one important way that we are doing that, and that I'm so happy to have my members here from Local Progress to talk about it, is right here in North Carolina, Carrboro Town Council actually did an expansive effort to get community input on how they use their money. And I would love for Barbara to, I'm gonna shift it to you, if you can start that conversation and share a lot of what you were able to do, any insights that you also learned along the way.
Yeah, and good morning to everyone. I'm so happy to be here and participate on this panel. I would like to take a point of privilege briefly to recognize our Carrboro Town Manager, Mr. Richard White, who is in attendance, as well as one of my Duplin County homegirls, Miss Roxana Murphy. I know her as Cindy Murphy. She's in here, and one of our up and coming local nonprofits, Grow to Life. So I did want to acknowledge that they were in this space with us this morning. And so, yes, in Carrboro, we're a municipality of about 22,000. And we're about that community engagement life. We have a very active community, and they show up, when asked and when they need to. And in this case, we had extensive outreach. We interviewed over 40 plus nonprofit and human service agencies. We had an online survey in multiple languages, English, Spanish, and Burmese. We also had paper surveys, just realizing, some folks are just not attached to the online, process. And so, we wanted to cover all the bases. We went back old school with the paper surveys that were distributed at multiple town buildings, as well as our very famous Carrboro Farmers Market. We had the ETC Institute, is a scientifically valid survey that sought responses by snail mail, but eventually I guess it got there, email, as well as text messages. And even for further engagement, there was also a survey of Carrboro's qualified census tract. And that's somewhat of a common method for identifying communities with a large proportion of potentially low income residents. And that's for deeper engagement to ensure that we reach more of the Black and Brown communities. We held a series of Carrboro conversations where community members came in and talked to us about different issues, affordable housing on town-owned land. They talked to us about the 203 project, which is coming to the town of Carrboro, but we took advantage of that opportunity and also sought input from them. So that was just like two things, killing two birds with one stone. A lot on social media, right? Carrboro is all over social media. We had 1,000 touch points of engagement on our town's social media platforms. And there are email shares of our Town of Carrboro newsflash to all of our community partners, such as El Centro Hispano, our Affordable Housing Coalition, and the Refugee Community Partnership, to name a few. We had over 950 participants to engage, and they provided over 250 comments. Our town council has also spent a considerable amount of time discussing ARPA related topics and developing, a framework, a potential framework for the distribution of these funds. And so I think we may be talking about it again in May and potentially getting to a point where we're actually able to move towards distribution of the funding. But like it was mentioned earlier, the rules and staff having time to pour through the rules as to how we can spend the money, has really, kind of held up the process. And so this is what we're doing in the borough, Carver.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I would love to know, as far as, from start to finish, if you can kind of expound upon, like, where did you start? Did you start thinking about what partners you could potentially partner with in getting this done? Were there was there an emphasis on different neighborhoods that you all sought to receive any particular input from?
Yeah, and so all of that, and as I mentioned about Carborough's qualified census tract, I mean, certainly that was an extra effort to reach folks that otherwise we may not have been able to engage with through the normal avenues that we were using, such as the online survey or even, a paper survey. And so there was that extra effort to be at various town events and to reach those that normally are not reachable by conventional methods. I feel like we discussed it and really talked about who we wanted to reach, because we know that there's a portion of our community that's plugged in completely. I mean, they're always plugged in, they know what's happening, and they follow us. But then there's that other portion, right, that may not even know about this funding, the availability of the funding, and their ability to receive some of the funding. And so we're aware of that. And, I think we've done amazingly as far as outreach to those that would otherwise be hard to reach.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I just saw a comment from Arlene. Arlene says, I love the community engagement and the efforts to connect with all of your communities. I love that too. And so now I'm going to take us a slight shift to the mayor of Prairie View, Texas. Texas is a state similar to ours as it relates to political makeup, and we have some of the same challenges. And sometimes I hear folks, whether it's community or even elected officials, we can't do that in North Carolina. And it's like, no, but we can, and we can push the envelope. Where there's will, there's power, and we can get it done. And so I would love to hear from the mayor, Brian Rowland from Prairie View, Texas, to share with us about their entire process of how they've been using ARPA.
Well, one, I just want to say thank you all. Thank you all for allowing me to come share with you. Hopefully the noise is not too bad, but definitely peace and power. The vision of when I became mayor, I had a thing called, we wanted to bring freedom and liberation to our community, called We're One Prairie View. Coronavirus was going on at the time, and we just managed our way through it. It was important that we engaged not only understanding, but made sure equity was at the middle. Many of you may have heard of something called the CARES Act. That was the first allocation of money prior to ARPA. Moni cities first time got money to focus on two areas: testing, what's going on, and stabilizing your community. That transitioned into the next administration, which was the Biden administration, which passed the American Rescue Plan Act. From that, if you were a municipality, depending upon if you had a direct allocation, or cities like ours, which got an allocation through the state. So cities in Texas, 50,000 or less, submitted their stuff to the Texas Department of Emergency Management, which managed the project to make sure cities got their first allocation. From this process, we then engaged community members and staff members of like, hey, what do we do? We knew that this money was for the people, and it was important that we had many voices. Now, we're not done, because the money needs to be appropriated by 2024, and it needs to be spent by 2026. So we have time. It is important, though, for everybody on this call, whether you're in government or you're organizing to help government, this is going to be probably one of the first and last times that many cities get this Christmas gift. This Christmas gift is something that we should be using to cement ourselves, being very intentional about equity in our communities, specifically communities of color, specifically marginalized communities and neighborhoods. So, there's 7 categories. It is very easy in a government to be able to use the money for revenue replacement. Each municipality can take the basic allocation of $10 million and move the money into that. What you want to do is you want to engage your administrators, you want to engage your elected officials to become knowledgeable. They should be having conversations, because the first allocations, all cities and counties have the money now. They have 50% of their money. The question is, here's an opportunity for you to engage out of those categories, whether it be for employees or premium pay, whether it be for water, sewer, broadband, or whether it have to do with food insecurity. Those communities that had food deserts. Here's an opportunity for you to have that conversation and force your local government to create programs. We had community COVID incentives, so right now we have not aligned the community incentives, but we have put out our incentives for the current employees. City Council passed it unanimously. We did the COVID testing. We did, right now, specifically in Texas, the only employees, government employees that were allowed to get additional days off were first responders. So what happened to the secretary or the people who work in those in City Hall, but did not get the additional 5 to 7 days that first responders got paid days off? And so what we did is we tried to use that as an opportunity for us to support our local employees, but also moving towards something like we do with utilities assistance. City Council passed a moratorium not to cut off water or utilities that we own on citizens. We did that. It went for over a year. Now, one of the other things is people got comfortable, but we do know that it was important that if we didn't make that step, who was going to make the step? And so we now have a program where we allocated over $150,000 for utility assistance for people in our community who had, who had outstanding water bills, couldn't afford to, pay their bills. One of the other main good things that we have put on the table and have not been again rolled out at this moment is our community. So we've devised a community panel. In that community panel, a lot of the times the administration and or the administrative staff from each department kind of knows where the money should go. We didn't want to just depend on people on the inside, right? So inside out game. What we decided is to have, we had a pool of money that we wanted to give to everyday citizens who served on this committee to be able to say, hey, these are the 7 categories. What did we miss? What are some of the programs that you think would be beneficial to our community for us to roll out? That's one of the things we did. And one of the other things that is on the table, City Council has, what we've done is I have 5 City Council members, and we've put in the budget about $10,000 each council member for them to roll out a program specific that under the 7 categories of the allocation for them to roll out specifically, right? So, you talk about shared governance, executive branch, legislative branch. This gives them an opportunity to have some stake in the game. And so these are some of the things that we have been able to put in our plan. As you know, or may not know, April 30th is the first iteration of when your municipality or county needs to submit their plan. That's, I think, this Saturday. And so, again, what you submit in the plan is not the end all be all. So all you organizers on the call, make sure that you press upon even your good mayors and city council members about opportunities to reimagine what this money can do. This is the first time you have the ability to be able to specifically say this small business grant program is for minority businesses, for women-owned businesses. This is the first time you're able to not have to argue with people about local property tax dollars. So again, I don't want to belabor the point. I'm ready to listen and engage. But those are just some of the things we were able to do. Again, water, sewer, broadband. We created a broadband task force. We put about $50,000 into understanding where we're at in our community. As you know, not having the internet is a social justice issue. And so we wanted to just make those connections and use this money. The goal is for you to use this money to make sure that your community 5 years from now can definitely see the impact of what you're doing. It is an investment. And we need the citizens to press upon the elected officials to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do.
Thank you so much, Mayor Rowland. Yes, it is a huge investment, huge investment. And so now I'm going to transition us into taking questions. To get us warm, think about your questions and place them in the chat, and I will facilitate those questions to our panelists. Any questions you may have, no question is too big or too small for the folks that we have on this panel. I wanted to make sure we have very experienced folks on this panel. And so I'm going to start us off while you're thinking of your questions about why do each of you feel like it's so important to think out the box as it relates to allocating this funding? And I guess, could we start with you, Barbara?
Yeah, sure. And so I want to piggyback off what Mayor Bryan was saying about this Christmas gift. This once in a lifetime opportunity to use this funding for the betterment of our community. And when I think about using these funds, I think about improving the everyday lives of our community members and creating stronger infrastructure that will carry us into the future, as Mayor Bryan just said. And so, I mean, we have to get it right. And I think a good way to get it right is to listen to our community voices. And so we kind of were operating kind of, in a status quo fashion, pre-COVID. And so we're in COVID and folks are screaming, it's like, oh, new normal, never again. We'll never go back to the way we were doing things. Well, never again, never again. Okay, well, folks are falling back already. I mean, that's just the reality of it as we come out of, COVID from where we were. But certainly I believe it is just like the biggest opportunity, that we have ever had to put the money in the hands of the folks and the causes that need it most. And not kind of operate in that status quo fashion. I think about the most vulnerable folks, within our community. I think about affordable housing. I think about food insecurity. I think about mental health services. I think about water and sewer, as Mayor Bryan mentioned. I think about the broadband access, which is, that just came up as just like this really huge thing during COVID. Our kids in school, you had to have a computer at home, you had to have, the internet access. And so for me, it really is about improving and stabilizing the everyday lives of the folks within our communities, however that comes. I mean, that's what it's about for me. And it's a huge Christmas gift. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any other, Legia or Brian, you want to add to that?
I'll say, one, it's just important that we recognize that we have to be very intentional. Our communities today can't look like this 2 years from now. We have the opportunity to sustain those neighborhoods or even whole communities like ours that have food deserts. We can use this money to make important investment in those infrastructure, whether it be food, whether it be broadband, whether it be technology, or whether it just is refining how cities communicate with its residents through the robocalls, through getting message billboards. Monies can be used to what we call community engagement. And it's important that once we roll out these programs, that communities take hold of this, right? And use this for all things moving forward. I think it's very important that we do that, because again, the new normal is this. And so there are a lot of opportunities to really specifically also strengthen nonprofit organizations. You can use that to spend to, you can allocate money for nonprofit organizations in your community that do just some of this work. And so everybody should be around the table. Here's an opportunity again for organizations that are in the shadows, that people may say, oh, don't use my property tax dollars to support those organizations. Well, on this, here's an opportunity for you to do that.
Certainly. I see you have your hand raised, Barbara.
Yeah, I meant to mention earlier about our a biennial community survey. And, you know, across the board, you know, things like affordable housing and helping the most vulnerable within our community and mental health services, some of the very stuff that we're just talking about using the money for has come up consistently. And this was even pre-COVID. So again, you know, community voices are speaking and leading the way. And some of these local nonprofits, like Mayor Bryan was talking about the nonprofits, you know, making sure that they can have access to some of the money because they're working in the trenches, you know, with the folks, you know, who are most vulnerable in our community. So I just wanted to add that in. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And Brian, I see your hand up too.
Really want to make a point, because it's important where we list out all the 7 categories. It's important that your community gets engaged. This money can go to normal everyday things that I see as the mayor, but if the community does not push back on me to say, hey, you need to think deeper and harder, and here's some other things that we can use the money for. We all need to stretch our imagination, because if we just normally just say, hey, we're just going to do waters, I mean, there's not enough money to fix water and sewer infrastructure in every city. So you could use the money just on that and it still wouldn't be done. So what I'm saying is that we need everyone to understand that, understand the program. All minority elected officials also need to understand what's going on. Most administrators are probably doing 80% of the allocating. And so it's important that communities get involved and get engaged and, again, push back on your elected officials to make sure that we're just not, spending money on the easy things. Even though we need it, this is our opportunity for us to dig deeper on, facilities that, for the long term, that people are doing around the country, creative things.
Certainly. Legia, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Brian and Barbara really said everything, but I think the only other 2 things I would add, one is, I think just to underscore basically what Barbara said in the chat, is that you could really use this money to kind of pilot things that you think that the community will benefit from and appreciate, but, maybe there hasn't been advocacy for it yet because, people are operating under this idea of scarcity. We don't have enough money to do this like right to counsel for, eviction, which is something that Kansas City did, for example. They did a pilot, and I'm sure what the pilot will do after 2 years is that, whoa, this program is amazing, and actually people really want it. And then you can kind of cement over time and, figure out future budget allocations for really great ideas. And then I just also wanted to talk about this a little bit in the larger context of, I feel like, Brian and Barbara are both touching on this, is just we're at a time where there's a lot of attacks on government. I think it's think about the attacks on our schools, this, really BS, critical race theory stuff. And that's really an attack on public education and our teachers. And I think that what is also really important and why it's important to engage your communities is that this is an opportunity to prove that government can do stuff for people that's good, right, to improve their lives. And so I just think that is kind of a bigger framing that we should all bring to this, is that we're at an unprecedented time where there's just a lot of attacks on, what government can do. And I think that this is a great opportunity to kind of fight back against that.
Thank you so much for bringing that together, Legia. Are there any questions from the crowd to put in the chat? And if there aren't any, I do want to kind of bring it back, Legia, in your presentation, just giving us an overview of the American Rescue Plan. You mentioned that with everything that's occurring, it's all connected, whether that's inflation that is occurring right now. I was watching a press conference with the Democrat leadership, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer yesterday, about gas prices, how that's connected. Bringing this all together about how this direct funding from the federal government to cities and counties can combat that. Can you kind of wrap that up in a bow for folks to understand, like we have an opportunity here, like a true opportunity here?
Yeah, I think that I think in the short term, there's not so many things that so many levers that local governments have to deal with inflation, because, that's like a lot of the things that the Federal Reserve and kind of macroeconomic policymakers are doing. But I think that there are lots of things that local governments can do in the long term. And then I think in the short term to just alleviate the pressures, especially on I feel like everyone here, Brian and Barbara, have been talking about, that just thinking about low income communities, and inflation is hardest, obviously, for people on fixed incomes. And I think that, there are I think that all of the things that I feel like Mayor Brian was saying, like when it comes to like utility payment support, rental assistance, we all know that part of inflation going up is also the rent is too damn high. And direct cash payments, fare free transit, all these sorts of things that would really support folks who are just, living on less. I think that's a really important way to kind of alleviate the pressures of inflation. And then I think in the long term, a lot of the challenges that we're seeing with inflation is because of, say, like dependency on fossil fuels. And there are things that investing in renewable energy is something that local governments can do with ARPA funds and green technology that can help long-term alleviate some of our dependency on, whatever happens in Ukraine will have an impact on our gas prices. And then I think on the rent and housing prices situation, that is also like a long-term problem of just, we have been unfortunately not building enough housing in our country for decades. And, all of the use of ARPA funds to build affordable housing, to build workforce housing are really great ways to kind of alleviate those things. So even though I know inflation feels like this big problem that, like you said, that, senators and Congress people are dealing with, actually at the local level, there are things that we can do to set ourselves up, to be better prepared for the situation in the future. And there are things that we can do to, help support people who are dealing with the challenges of inflation right this moment too.
Thank you so much, Legia. I see that there is a comment in the chat by Keisha Doby. Keisha says, I'm not an elected official in my community. I'm unsure about how I should propose ideas to my city council members and county commissioners on possible ways to use funds. Is there anything that Barbara or Brian, you would like to share with them?
Brian, go ahead, Brian. I went first.
Sure. Okay, sure. I would say one, there's a document you could, I think people can Google. And if you just Google coronavirus, state and local fiscal recovery funds, that will, one, give you the information on the specific categories, but also allow you to dig deeper into things that you may not have thought about when looking to allocate these funds. You do not have to be an elected official to bring recommendations. It's important to understand the categories, but once you understand the categories, it's incumbent upon you to engage your elected officials about, hey, here's an opportunity. This neighborhood has been underutilized, underinvested. What investments are you making in this neighborhood, which usually are Black and brown neighborhoods? Force them to give you allocations, amounts. Do not allow them to say this is for the whole community. You can make specific intentional allocation, which is the imperative piece about how we bring equity to this conversation. And so I would just say again, coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, or you can look on the American Rescue Plan. The city of Raleigh has a plan that's on the internet. And so Google some of the cities, look at their plans, look at what they're doing, improve them, innovate them, and then use it in your community. But you do not have to be elected, and you should ask your local elected officials, what is our ARP plan? How do I get on the committee? And I need to make sure that neighborhoods that do not necessarily get investments are in the plan. And I think if you do that, they'll do nothing but support you.
And so I'll weigh in. Intentionality is really important, and being specific about how you want the money spent. Engaging with the local governing boards where you live is very important. And that means going to the council meetings and sending emails. You know, we need to hear from you. And I really think that that's the best way to get your message across, because, you know, those folks are the ones who will make the decision about how the funding is dispersed. And I mean, we want to hear from you. And so that does mean, you know, coming to these council meetings and sending emails and just advocating. And also, like Mayor Bryan said, just knowing what's out there as it relates to information about the use of the funds, you know, for, you know, whatever your needs may be. But I think the advocacy and engagement piece is really huge, and letting your local electeds hear from you, and also being intentional and specific, you know, about your ask, you know, and not being so broad. If you want XYZ for Black and Brown community, immigrant community, then it needs to be said like that, because the broader it is, the more likely it may be that the target that you're talking about, you know, it won't be hit, you know, exactly as it should. And so I know, me for one, I don't have a problem, you know, saying exactly, you know, what I want and who I want it to go to. And so intentionality and being specific is really huge here too. Thanks.
Thank you so much. A similar question was raised up in the chat just about how we collaborate together. And one thing I do want to break down is that I feel like now this conversation is shifting into tactics. And before we wrap up, I want to make sure everyone is aware this is the space where we can collaborate together. You know, although we are virtual for this summit, and this is a partnered workshop that Local Progress is partnering with the North Carolina Black Alliance on, we have the opportunity, if there's somebody in this room that their name is familiar to you, or, you know, when we started out before and we said, where are you from? And they're in the same place you're from, let's get together. Let's set up a meeting with the council, or let's set up with our member that represents our district for the county commission or the city council. And let's set up a meeting with them to talk about, okay, what is your plan for this money? Oh, you don't have a plan? You know, it's due tomorrow. Brian, I don't know if you realize you said Saturday. So Saturday is tomorrow. And there's still opportunity about, you know, how this money is going to be allocated that you can weigh in. And so I want to make sure all of the community activists and advocates on this line right now feel empowered to have those type of conversations with their elected officials, because they work for us. We elect them. We're in election season right now, and they can be doing a lot more for us. And before we wrap up, I see Adam. So good to see you, Adam. You have a question. I don't know, Adam, if you're going to be able, I don't know if you're trying to get unmuted or not, but if you could put your question in the chat. I don't know. I think that's what's happening right now. Yeah, it's not letting you unmute. Adam, do you mind putting your question in the chat? Adam is with the Justice Center, North Carolina Justice Center, and we have been collaborating on some work around the ARPA funds across the state, and there's a lot of great work going on. Yes, it is definitely okay, Adam, because I have a feeling I know what resources you're going to share, so I think it's okay. You can go ahead and add those resources in the chat. And so before we wrap up, we have 2 more minutes. We can go a little over, but I'm gonna make sure we stay on time. For our panelists, is there anything else that you would like to leave this space with?
So again, thank you for the opportunity. That's first. And thank you to Mayor Brian and Legia and you, DeAndrea, and the rest of the North Carolina Black Alliance team for this amazing event on this very important issue, the ARPA funding. I just think it's really important for folks to educate themselves about ARPA funding, and also to be prepared to advocate and lend your voice to your local governing boards about how to use it. The education piece is huge, and I hate to even say it, but there's some people that are not even aware, that this is available. So we have to, keep educating folks on it, how it could potentially be used, and get folks to engage with their local governing boards who will be handling the distribution of that funding. Thank you.
I just want to say thank y'all. Thank y'all for allowing me to be on your panel, for sharing some of my experiences. But I just want to leave y'all with a couple quick points. One, reports due tomorrow, so it's a baseline report. So then now you'll know what your city is doing. It's doing all cities and all counties tomorrow. The second allocation will come September of 2022. The first allocations, every county and city has their money today. Ask for disparity study, ask for what minority companies are getting some of this money as far as businesses. There's your opportunity. If they didn't get it on the first time, the second time, September 2022. With the second allocation, they have an opportunity to change whatever they said tomorrow, to change it coming up. Because don't let them say, well, we already submitted this. No, they can change it. And so it's gonna be incumbent upon us as a communities to build collaboratives and make sure we have an inside out game to making sure our communities have a voice. Again, it's been an honor and privilege to communicate with you all. And sorry for the noise, I'm at the airport.
No worries, Brian. Legia, did you want to leave the group with any words?
I think I can't say it better than Barbara and Brian, but I think my only thing I'd say is if you have questions, reach out to DeAndrea, and I'll also put my email in the chat too. We're here to help you. And yeah, we're here to support. It's been an honor to be here with you all.
Thank you so much. And so as Legia is putting her email in the chat, and you see a ton of resources, I'm going to give everybody a moment if you just want to open up other tabs so you can have all these other resources. And I do believe that this session is recorded. So the North Carolina Black Alliance will likely have a recording for you if you want to see this again with the links. At 11:15, you have an opportunity to go back to the main room. And so Katisha put the, let's see if I can copy it, the message about when that can be. So right now, thank you so much again for coming to this session. Take a bio break or a snack break if you want, and then meet back in the meeting room for 11:15. And I hope that everyone has an amazing weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Peace and power. Y'all have a good one.